In my last video titled Ubisoft shut down XDefiant after promising they wouldn't as player numbers plummet, I discussed the death of XDefiant, yet another AAA live service, one from Ubisoft this time, that has unceremoniously ended after it failed to garner a consistent audience base, and with XDefiant being a free-to-play game, that right there is lethal. From day one, its reception was meager. You can see the critical and user reception on Metacritic is not particularly great. It did see significant numbers during its launch period, reaching 1 million unique players within 2.5 hours and eventually 8 million unique players within a week. But after that, those numbers began to wane. They struggled to reach 20,000 concurrent players across all platforms, which was not a good sign for a free-to-play live service. And eventually, Ubisoft itself admitted that XDefiant has fallen behind expectations and that their financial outlook was just not looking good. And so their stock plummeted, and that's amidst failures such as Star Wars Outlaws, which also fell behind expectations. But Ubisoft promised, that the game is absolutely not dying. This was based off of a blog post written by Mark Rubin, who is the executive producer on XDefiant. He said, "I just want to quickly address the status of the game, i.e., is the game dying? No, the game is absolutely not dying." And I really want to focus on this particular blog post and assurance in this video because the false sense of security that this provided is very relevant in the way XDefiant's sunsetting is being handled, specifically how they're providing refunds. And keep in mind that Mark Rubin assured not once but twice that there'd be no plans to shut down the game, that the game was not dying, so on and so forth, that XDefiant would be in it for the long run. But obviously we know now that promise didn't pan out, with the game beginning its sunset process on December 3rd, 2024, meaning that new downloads, player registrations, and purchases will no longer be available, and the game will fully shut down on June 3rd, 2025 next year, which means servers will go down, you will not be able to connect to the game, you will not be able to access the game, and the game will disappear from the face of the planet due to a lack of preservation efforts. Now, I want to look at the refund policy here because the more I think about it, the scummier this gets. It says right here that those who purchase the Ultimate Founders Pack will receive a full refund, and then players who have made virtual currency and downloadable content purchases since November 3rd, 2024 will also be fully refunded. Processing these refunds will take up to 8 weeks. So DLC can include things like the XDefiant Gold Pack, the Starter Pack, and the Combat Pack, and virtual currency is essentially this. Now let's specifically look at that date right there, November 3rd, 2024. Basically, players who purchase currency or DLC within the last month before the announcement of the sunsetting of the game will be eligible for refunds. But here's why that is actually an incredibly unreasonable window. As I said before, there was a promise from Mark Rubin that the game is absolutely not dying. And this was a promise that was made all the way back in September 18th, 2024. That is 3 months before the game's sunsetting. And then it was only a month later, on October of 2024, that Mark Rubin further assured that there are no plans to shut down after Season 4. What that did was assure people that not only will you be able to play the game for the long term, but you are safe in buying more virtual currency, more DLC, spending more money on this game because the game was not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And so people did spend money on the game between September of 2024 and December of 2024. It was an assurance that it was safe to spend money on this game and that money would not go to waste. But we learned out of the blue on December 3rd that if you spent money following the assurance that the game would not die, you did end up wasting that money unless you spent it after November 3rd. The fact that the refund window is only a month before the game's sunsetting and not 3 months, which is the time window in which it was assured that the game is absolutely not dying, is, I think, utterly scummy and really deceptive. I think Ubisoft has a duty to guarantee a refund to anyone who purchased any sort of DLC or currency not after November 3rd, 2024, but the day in which this assurance was made, which was September 18th, 2024. There's no scenario in which this game was ever going to give a full refund across the board because it was alive for long enough. It's not like a Concord situation where the game died so quickly, mere weeks after launch, that they just essentially had to give a full refund because people really didn't get to experience the game. With XDefiant, people did get to experience the game for months, but a lot of promises in terms of the roadmap was not fulfilled because of the game's early demise, so some form of refund is warranted. And I think the ideal window to make that refund policy much more graceful is the 3 months in which people thought for sure this game was absolutely not going to die, by Ubisoft's own communication, by Mark Rubin's own communication. Because otherwise, this is essentially a grift, giving people that false sense of security that it's okay to spend money on this game that they assured would be in it for the long run, only for them to find out that if they spent money between September 18th, when the assurance happened that the game would not die, and November 3rd, then that money is completely wasted on a game that once it dies, all of the money poured into currency and DLC will have been in vain. I also want to highlight that them refunding the Ultimate Founders Pack, I don't think that was out of the kindness of their hearts. I think that was kind of a bit of a requirement for them. For those who don't know, there are 3 Founders Packs. There's the regular Founders Pack for $19.99, the Founders Pack Elite for $39.99, and the Founders Pack Ultimate, the one that's getting refunded, for $69.99. And I think the reason this one specifically is getting refunded is because it was unable to fulfill all of its promises. Among the things that's included in the Ultimate Pack is all 4 Year 1 factions are unlocked as they become available. The game did not last the year that is required for all 4 factions to be unlocked, and so they have to refund this lest they risk legal repercussions due to the fact that promises here were unfulfilled. If they were doing this out of the kindness of their hearts, then they would have refunded the Founders Pack and the Founders Pack Elite as well. But as far as these packs are concerned, essentially the promises were fulfilled enough where they deemed it not refundable, despite it being money that went to waste on a game that only lasted less than a year in terms of it being sunset, and in terms of the shutdown, it'll have lasted just slightly over a year. The game launched in May of 2024. It'll completely shut down in June of 2025. It's a pretty short-lived live service, especially for a Ubisoft live service, where they tend to try to stick with a live service even if the launch is rough. A lot of people thought that this was maybe going to get the Rainbow Six Siege treatment or the For Honor treatment. But when I think about it, those games, they had the initial rough launch, but it was eventually supported to a point where it did eventually garner a solid player base. But those games were sold at a premium price point. Those were not free-to-play games, whereas with XDefiant, it being free-to-play and its player base being so paltry, it was just costing them a lot of money because people were not recurrently spending on this game enough, and they didn't have that base financial support of the premium purchases to be able to sustain this game for the long term. And so they decided this particular endeavor was not worth sustaining and reviving. And so it's hardly surprising that this died off if they were failing to sustain even like 20,000 concurrent players by a few months after launch for a free-to-play experience that is financially lethal. But the way they're handling the refund policy, I'm realizing just really stuck out to me. That date, November 3rd, how short that window is in comparison to how long the window was that people were assured that this game would live on for a long time, that the game would absolutely not die, essentially giving people the green light to feel safe and spending money on this game, and that money would see its value continue for the long term because this game would remain online for the long term. All of that which ended up being false. When I think about how all this is playing out, I'm realizing that this refund policy is actually kind of shit. And I think people have a right to demand that Ubisoft do better under these particular circumstances, especially because they straight up put out false information. They communicated lies to the players, to the customers, to the paying customers, and even developers seem to have been shocked by the shutdown. Putting out assurances like these that they do not live up to has repercussions. It can be damaging, and Ubisoft needs to do much more to compensate people for the assurance that they were given in spending money on a game that, was not meant to be. Like, if I was in a situation where I was keeping up with the game and was enjoying it and was told that this game would not be dying, and then I spent money on it only to discover that it died shortly after I was told it was not dying, and that a significant portion of that money would be non-refundable, I'd be pissed. And it's something that should be eyebrow-raising, as it seems just the worst form of generosity. It feels like feigned generosity, given how inconsiderate this particular refund policy is when you really think about what they're doing here. And so I personally encourage people to speak out if you did spend money due to assurances that the game would not die and that money will not be refunded. And if that money spending was inspired by the fact that you were told that the game would live longer than it did. Well, at the very least, that's one man's take on this particular refund situation. My initial impression of this was, well, at least Ubisoft is getting some form of refund. But as I think about it, as I think about the implications of everything that has happened surrounding this game, the communications surrounding this game, and the lies presented in terms of the longevity of this game and how the refund is being handled, it feels shadier and shadier the more I kind of mull over it. But that's just me, at least. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on this particular refund policy. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.